Hi, I'm Kathy Daneman, and on behalf of Mystery Writers of America, I'm happy to welcome you to the 77th Annual Edgar Award Symposium. Tonight's discussion is with the nominees for Best First Novel by an American Author. Our moderator is Rachel Howzell Hall, and our bookseller is Centuries and Sleuths in Forest Park, Illinois. You can learn more about the Edgar Awards by following us on social media using the hashtag Edgars2023 or by visiting the websites mysterywriters.org and edgarsawards.com. The Edgar Awards will be live streamed on our YouTube channel on April 27th. During tonight's discussion, I will be posting links to our panelists' books in the chat, and please feel free to submit questions in the Q&A box throughout the conversation, and we'll get to them at the end of the hour. Rachel Howzell Hall is the author of 12 novels, including the best-selling thrillers We Lie Here and multiple award-nominated These Toxic Things and Now She's Gone. A Los Angeles native, Rachel is a former member of the board of directors for Mystery Writers of America and was a featured writer on NPR's acclaimed Crime in the City series and the National Endowment for the Arts Weekly podcast. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, panelists. Congratulations, everybody, on your nomination. I'm going to read bios just to let you know who all these wonderful people are. First, we have Erin E. Adams, author of Jackal. She's a first-generation Haitian American writer and theater artist. She received her BA with honors in literary arts from Brown University, her MFA in acting from the Old Globe and University of San Diego Shiley Graduate Theater Program, and her MFA in dramatic writing from NYU Tisch School of the Arts. An award-winning playwright and actor, Adams has called New York City home for the last decade. Welcome, Erin. Next, we have Eli Cranor, who played quarterback at every level, Pee-wee to professional, and then coached high school football for 5 years. These days, he's traded in the pigskin for a laptop, writing from Arkansas, where he lives with his wife and kids. Hey, Eli, hey.
Hey, Rachel. Glad to be here.
Ramona Emerson, hi, Ramona, is a Dene writer and filmmaker originally from Tallahatchie, New Mexico. She received her degree in media arts in 1997 from the University of New Mexico, and her MFA in creative writing for fiction in 2015 from the Institute of American Indian Arts. She has worked as a professional cinematographer, writer, and editor for over 25 years and is currently working on her 8th film project, Crossing the Line. She is an Emmy nominee, a Sundance Native Lab Fellow, a Time Warner Storyteller Fellow, a Tribeca All Access grantee, and a WGBH Producer Fellow. So she's done some stuff. Ramona just released her first novel, Shutter, the first of a trilogy, which was published with Soho Books in 2022 and recently longlisted for the National Book Award and the PEN Open Book and PEN Hemingway Award. Through her storytelling, Emerson looks at contemporary stories about her people and aims to question and redefine the expectations of Native cultural identity, highlighting stories that are not a part of mainstream media. She currently resides in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where she and her husband, producer Kelly Byers, run their production company, Real Indian Pictures. Hi, Ramona. Katie Gutierrez, hi, Katie, is the author of the national best-selling debut novel, More Than You'll Ever Know, by Moreau Michael Joseph imprint, which is also a Good Morning America Book Club pick for June 2022. She is a National Magazine Award finalist whose writing has appeared in Time, Harper's Bazaar, The Washington Post, Long Reads, and more. She has an MFA from Texas State University and lives in San Antonio, Texas with her husband and their 2 kids. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you, Rachel.
And finally, but not least of all, Grace D. Lee grew up in Pearland, Texas, and is a graduate of Duke University, where she studied biology and creative writing. Her debut novel, Portrait of a Thief, was an instant New York Times bestseller, USA Today bestseller, and a #1 international bestseller. Her next novel, Anatomy of a Betrayal, is forthcoming. She currently attends medical school at Stanford University, a little university up the coast. Welcome, Grace.
Thanks, Rachel. Glad to be here.
How y'all doing? Good?
Good. Yeah, pretty good.
Happy to be here.
Yay. Awesome. I'm happy to be here again. I said this to you before, but I am honored to have led the committee that selected your books as some of the best of 2022. So let's start some questions. For those who aren't familiar with your books, let's give them a Twitter sentence about, what your book is about. Erin.
All right. So Jackal, it follows Liz, a young Black woman, as she returns to her hometown in the Rust Belt for her best friend's wedding. At that wedding, her best friend's daughter is taken, and Liz uncovers a series of missing children in her hometown. She finds out that they're all Black, they're all young girls. Now she must uncover the truth before her and the child are devoured by the beast lurking in her town's dark past.
Awesome. Very good. Ramona.
Forensic photographer Rita Totochini carries with her a very deep secret. The fact that she can see and communicate with the very same dead people that she photographs.
Very good. Awesome. Katie.
Well, if it's a Twitter sentence, it might say something like, a secret family in this economy? Why the hell would a mother want more responsibility?
Ah, is that a rhetorical question or?
Yeah.
Very good. Grace.
Portrait of a Thief is an Asian American heist novel about college students stealing back looted art from Western museums and inspired by the true story of Chinese art disappearing from museums around the world.
Wow, very good. Awesome. And finally, Eli.
Yeah, Don't Know Tough is about Billy Lowe, and he is the very volatile running back. He's got a new coach named Trent Powers, who's in from California. He's a fish out of water in Arkansas. And then it's about the murder that threatens to tear their whole town apart on the eve of the playoffs. And Twitter version would be Friday Night Lights meets Ozark Netflix, that little pitch.
Awesome. As sitting here and listening to one after the other of your sentence of your Twitter sentence, it's obvious to me, and this is probably why many of us, our committee chose your books, that these are very contemporary issues that you all are writing about, just from different viewpoints, of course, but every story has happened like in the last 3 years. How do you, as a writer, block out so much that's happening in the world? I mean, our jobs as crime writers is to reflect what's going on, but there's so much going on. When you wrote these books, how did you winnow that down to this issue that you're talking about? Anyone could jump in. We're gonna free, do that kind of thing. Don't make me choose.
I'm used to going with last of Adams. I always end up going first.
That's right. Yeah.
So at least for me, when it's not really wasn't a thing about like cutting down, it was just allowing, just kind of allowing everything that was happening in the to land on me and to motivate me and to be a way to construct my thoughts and to try to, tackle this larger issue through the lens of storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, the book sort of came together over a number of years. The first spark of the idea came when I read about a man who'd carried on this 30-year secret family 20 miles apart from his original one. And I read about that back in probably 2009 or 2010. But it wasn't until 2017 that sort of combined with the way true crime was entering the zeitgeist in this whole new way, where it suddenly became mainstream or like highbrow to be obsessed with murder in some ways. And I was really interested with our cultural obsession with true crime. And then those two things sort of collided with the fact that I had never really seen my hometown of Laredo, Texas, represented in fiction, and really South Texas in general. And so when those three aspects of the story combined, that was sort of when, yeah, there was like Erin said, less winnowing and more allowing the ideas to bounce off each other and sort of reveal, let those collisions kind of reveal what the story was.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think the process was very similar for me. Like Katie, I was inspired by a true story. So years ago, I heard about these, thefts that were happening across museums and how all the art that was being stolen by these thieves had originally been looted from China.
Mhm.
And so the idea had, been in my mind for a while. I wanted to do something there. And then during the pandemic in particular, I kind of wanted to read a book that, was addressing these issues, but also, had characters that represented people who looked like me, characters who could go on adventures. And so I thought, what if it were, Asian American college students who were hired for these heists? Like, how would they pull something like this off? What would the challenges be? And also, what would the joys be?
Ramona or Eli?
I think for me, my book kind of goes back and forth, the past, and then comes forward to the present day, and it moves back and forth all the time. So the timeline for me, and the things I was discussing were really things that I had experienced because I had worked as a forensic photographer for 16
Mhm.
years, and I was basically taking a time period in my life and creating a world for Rita around that timeline. So for me, my timeline runs about in the 70s all the way through to like 2005. And so it's a huge stretch of time. So for me, it was really about how one person can navigate two different worlds. And so that's how my story was kind of about growth in history and memory as opposed to a specific event.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, it was a lot similar to what everybody has been saying, in that, I was a high school football coach, and I wrote the first draft of this book in 2016. And so that was like the year after I'd just gotten out of football. Um, so a lot of that stuff was fresh. And in regard to like you said, like kind of focusing, everything of what I wanted this story to be about, it was in the book. We didn't get anywhere into like contracts or anything until like 2020, so it was like a 4-year time, and it was kind of just a winnowing down of the stuff that I thought was unique to this place and these people for that story.
Yeah, I always believe, and I've said this before, like when I talk about books and when I lecture about books and writing, that the best books, in my opinion, there's some personal in there. There's something that you harvest from your own life to put into these books, and personal becomes public in a way. And seeing that this was your first book, was that ever a fear of yours that someone was going, or your mom or somebody at church or somebody in your community saying, you wrote that thing and oh my gosh, and how could you? Were you ever worried about disappointing someone or what they would say? Did that ever inhibit you? Does it still inhibit you in some ways, especially
Yeah.
community stuff, small communities, ethnic communities, class communities, putting your business
I'll jump in real quick on this one, because it is that I have this saying, like every book I've ever written, scares me in some way. And this one, being the first one, and having just got out of football, I remember like the week the book came out, I got all these calls from all these players, like all these former players, and they're like, "Hey, coach, is that me?" And I'm like, obviously you hadn't read the book. It's just guys that played like running back or something. Because I'm like, you don't want that to be you, and that's the deal. I mean, yeah, there's this great, I think it's a Harry Crews quote where he's talking about Flannery O'Connor, like going back into Catholic church in Georgia, back into mass, and he's like, can you imagine the stuff that those little old women were whispering about Flannery O'Connor, And it's not, I mean, it's the same for all. I mean, I live in a town of about 20,000 where I grew up, my wife grew up, and it has been the strangest thing trying to, as we're signing. And now my mom, I don't have to worry about because I read out loud to my mom every night, like if when I'm drafting something. But I do like when I'm signing the books at like a launch event, is all these little like ladies, from my mom's Sunday school class. And they're like, oh, we're so excited. And I'm sliding them this book thinking like, but luckily I haven't really had any. It's always like a fear, that never seems to surface. So knock on wood.
No, people were shocked that I used the F word. They were cool with the violence, but you said fuck. Oh my gosh, I'm afraid for you. I'm afraid for you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
My mom wouldn't talk to me for 2 months after she read the first draft I gave her. And she was convinced that the mother in the book was about her. And she was really mad. And she was like, am I that bad of a mother? I mean, I went through it for like 2 months and my mom was really pissed. And I had to convince her that it's not you, Mom. Yeah, there's some stuff that maybe we experienced, but it's totally not you. And she dies like, Mom, you're obviously alive. But the bigger thing for me was the fact that as a Dene person, talking about death is
Right.
the biggest taboo that exists in our culture. And that was my fear, is how Dene people take what I was writing about. And I was fully prepared to be spanked by medicine men at my readings on the Navajo Nation. And the few times I went out to sell the book on the reservation, I was afraid of how people would react to the book. And I was keenly aware of what I had written and how bad that was. So luckily for me, though, it's been great. I've had a lot of support from Navajo people who have read the book. And I think their feeling of what I've written is more about healing than it is death. And so it's helped me, but I'm still, when I go into those spaces, I'm still fearful of who may come and talk to me about what I've written. And it still weighs heavy on my mind.
Yeah. No, I you wait for it to stop mattering like that, but if it ever stops for me, I'll let you know. And I'm on the 12th. Anyone else?
Yeah.
This is interesting because, again, learning about so many cultural things that people kind of throw away or dismiss, it really, for a writer, these are huge, huge worries. We're already kind of neurotic and taking everything in, and then to add additional stuff. Sorry, next.
I can, as someone who's set their book in their hometown, I was quite worried. But my hometown also has an incredibly fascinating history. All of the historical stuff in Jackal is true, like the Johnstown flood is true. The Great Banishment in 1923, like that happened in my hometown. When I was working with revising the book and kind of like getting, okay, it's about to start to go out into the world, I did have plenty of anxiety dreams or just not sleeping about how people from town react. And thankfully, it's been very, very embraced by the town. And I've had more than one person either reach out to me digitally or whenever I did my events in Johnstown say, thank you for getting it right. There was a whole lot of, especially Johnstown's in the Rust Belt, and I feel like in light of everything that's been happening politically, there's been lots of, and I agree, very thin representation when it comes to the Rust Belt. It's a complicated place with a lot of history and a lot of just like pain. And most people, anyone at least who's reached out to me so far has been like, thank you for getting it right. So that has relieved me a bit, but it's exactly like you say, Eli, if you're not a little terrified, you're not doing it right.
Yeah, I think that, while I was writing it, I sort of had to block out the, ultimate potential reality of people in my life reading it and people from my hometown of Laredo where it's set reading it. And it wasn't until the book launched and I had an event in Laredo and, the town like really showed up, and it was so moving, but at the same time, I felt like this enormous fear and weight of responsibility, you know, that all these people who were coming up and so excited, you know, like to see Laredo in a book for the first time ever. And for a lot of them, you know, I was the first Mexican American writer that they were going to read a book by, you know, and so it felt, I could feel how important it was to them. And I was terrified, you know, the same, you know, kind of what Erin is saying. I was terrified of potentially not getting it right. And, you know, and I was worried about how people would feel about a depiction of the city that I hoped would come across with my own fondness and affection, but also with kind of like not making it seem as though it's this perfect town.
Right.
I was worried on two levels. You know, on one, there was the level of the history, which was in the 1980s, when the United States was going through its recession. Laredo was sort of protected for a while by the income that came in from across. And so Laredo and Nuevo is right on the border. And so the income that comes in from Nuevo Laredo is essential to Laredo's economy. And so until the peso devalued, Laredo was sort of cushioned during this recession. But when the peso did devalue, Laredo was sort of hit twice as hard. And, you know, a third of the city was out of work. And I grew up with my parents' stories of this time period, but I was really aware that, you know, I wasn't writing the time period from my own memory. I was writing it from stories and from interviews and from articles that I had read, and trying to capture the Mexican side of the experience, as well as the backdrop to this story. So I was worried about potentially not getting the historical aspects right. And then I was worried about the emotional representation of, you know, our hometown and how people would react. It's really scary. And I think in some ways I'm even more scared of it now that I've done it once. I think it's going to be harder to sort of block out next time. But like Erin said, people have been, I think, very moved by at least my attempts to get as much right as I could. And by being able to see, you know, their town represented in a way that feels true to them. So that's, yeah.
Awesome. Grace?
Yeah, well, so Portrait of a Thief is an art heist, and I also work at Stanford's Art Museum as a tour guide. And so I remember just, you know, telling them about my book coming out, and they asked me to describe it. And I was like, oh, you know, it's a book about art museums and, you know, history and that sort of thing. And I just like, I couldn't bring myself to mention that it was about like, robbing the museum. And so the whole time they were like, oh my gosh, you know, we're so excited to read it. And you know, even the whole time I was writing it, I kept having these stress dreams where I was in the art museum and it was my job to rob them for research for my book. And I was just like, I can't, I'm going to get kicked out of school. Like, this is so stressful. So there's definitely that aspect where, you know, this book is about how much I love art and museums, but also the many ways I think that they can do better. And I think on a personal note, one of my fears around this book is that one of the main characters is, you know, the leader of the heist. He is in it because he loves art and art history, but is also afraid of pursuing it as a career. And I think that writing him and that whole experience had a lot of my own personal fears around what it means to be Asian American, to pursue this sort of career and to, you know, deeply love something, but also be very afraid that it won't love you back. And
that's actually a question, it's a related question that I want to ask next. We were talking about the fear of writing the book. Well, where do you all write from in your core? For instance, for me, I write about those things that I worry about, that I have no control over. And so I seek to write it so that I can gain some control. It doesn't have to be worry. It could be excitement. Where do you write from anything that you do?
I think mine is a combination that really resonates with me, because I think that in the book, the main character, Lore, who has a secret double marriage / secret family, she is a mother, and I became a mother twice through the writing of this book. during a pandemic. And, a lot of the really intense emotional and physical experiences of motherhood, so much of which is worry and fear and terror, but also like boredom and just like the insanity of doing the same thing over and over. A lot of that went into the book, during this time in ways that I didn't expect. And I think that, as I look at the next one, it's much more explicitly about motherhood and really so many of my fears around motherhood. So I do think that's part of it for me. But then also, I think we can probably all relate to hearing a story and that moment of curiosity of wanting to understand why a person did what they did and whether it's possible to understand a person's actions when they seem so extreme. And so for me, that was a real starting point for this character. Is it possible to understand somebody who ends up in this unfathomable place in their lives? And what does it mean if we can understand her along the way? So I think that, seeking to understand something, a curiosity to understand something, plus fear is probably
a combination. Yeah. Anyone else?
I can add. So I also write what terrifies me. Jackal is a blend of like mystery, thriller, and horror. And people always ask me like, oh, how do you write the horror scenes? Like, if I am not afraid, then it's not staying in the book. Like, it has to really terrify me on some level. And it's to understand, but like, not everything is that, thankfully. Like, some things I write because they delight me, like things that are just, really fun or funny, like all that. But it all has to be kind of from anything that feels like it's speaking to like that, like kind of solar plexus feeling. As long as it's pulling from there, then I know that I'm on the right track.
Anyone else for my next question, which is kind of related? I want to like tilt to the opposite. What has been the most exciting thing, either, the process or the business side? What's been the most exciting thing for you with your debut, with, having arrived?
I'll go. Yeah, I'll go. I was gonna say something about the where you write from, and there's that old writing like maxim, like write what you know, which is true in some regards, but I heard something like write what you love. So it's like write what you want, like write what you want to know, like what speaks to your soul, what has got you, like keeps you up at night. And the things we love are the things that scare us the most too. So it's like what y'all were saying, this idea of this fear, because that is it. Because I get all these questions, from these church ladies who my mom gives the book to, and they're like, why, Eli? Like, why is this so dark? And why is this? Because I'm not a real dark dude. Like, it's not. That's not really my personality. And I get the same questions about Arkansas. I have people, I get emails still like all the time, like, man, you really must hate Arkansas, like the way, and I don't know, like it's to me, there's this Barry Hannah quote I use all the time where he says, like, I'll say anything, I'll read anything, and I'll write anything as long as it's true, and so it's like, that's what, I guess there's things that scare me that I love. And like, there's that gray area where I'm not sure like what I really think about it, how I really feel about it. And when I find that little space, like that's where I try to wiggle in and then figure out, which way it is. And then my favorite thing, honestly, for this whole thing, I mean, it kind of started before the debut, like with you, Rachel. I mean, I got to do that Shop Talk deal for Crime Reads. And from there, like, as you get into this, it has just been like getting to know, like as a dude who was an English literature major, but also played quarterback at my university, and then was a high school football coach in Arkansas. Like there weren't many other cats that I could talk to about the things that I love. Yeah. So it's a strange diagram. So what I've loved most is like just meeting everybody, like getting to see all these really cool people that it's kind of like I've been looking for a long time.
Lovely.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, go ahead.
I think it's been very similar for me, just in terms of what's been so wonderful about this process. A Portrait of a Thief is my debut. It's not the first book that I've written, but it's the first book out and that other people are reading. And so going into it, what I really wanted to hold on to was that publishing a book is the dream. And so everything else is just bonus. And I think one of the best bonuses has been connecting with other authors and other readers. A lot of the reason why I write books is, to the person that I was back when I was, like years ago, or struggling with those same things, or maybe still struggling through them now. And I think hearing from readers, particularly young Asian American readers, has meant a lot to me, just because, it's who I was writing for.
Yeah, the moments when I've gotten, there was the launch in Laredo that I mentioned, and, seeing my parents' coworkers and, the second cousin that I haven't seen since I was 5, that they were like, do you know who I am? And, old teachers that I haven't seen in 20 years, like seeing how it mattered to my community, and receiving messages from readers, thanking me for the Spanglish and for just little moments in the book that, reminded them of our culture, and that our culture is beautiful. Like those things have, like, I get emotional talking about them. And then, these conversations here, getting to meet other people who are on this journey, I think for so many of us, the book that the first book published was not the first book, and we've all kind of dealt with our own disappointments and challenging roads, and it's been really wonderful. Another thing that's been exciting for me is that my dad, for my whole life, has not been a reader. Like, I don't think I ever saw him reading a novel growing up. And he and my mom, read my book side by side, and were, talking. And I went home recently, and not only had he read it again quietly, just on his own, but my mom now said he's like reading novels in general. He has a little stack on his nightstand.
Wow.
So yeah, that's a thing that's been really special for me.
That's incredible. That's lovely. That's lovely. Ramona?
I can just, oh, go ahead. Nope.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, you were asking about like where we write from, and I write from a deep sense of responsibility. And I think that comes from the fact that there are no other Navajo or Navajo Dene women writing this kind of stuff. And it's a huge amount of pressure. So for me, that is what's so great about it, and so exciting about it, is that I get Navajo readers coming to readings, and I go out to the Navajo Nation and I do readings, and we talk, and it's so refreshing, and it's like a sigh of relief to hear them say that I am writing the place that they recognize, and that they know people in their community that speak like the people in my book. They know people who they can relate to, and they're happy that I have put them on the page. As a Dene person, I've put them on the page, and it's not some outsider writer who's not Dene writing about us finally. And it's like, so for me, that's what was exciting, was that I didn't realize that until the book was out and people started telling me that, and I was like, oh, well, I guess that's true, because there aren't any other Navajo women writing this kind of stuff, or men. So that was exciting for me. And I have to admit that having my editor Juliet call me at 7 o'clock in the morning, screaming about the National Book Award on the phone, and I was like, what?
Yes.
You're joking, right? And she was like, no. That was something that was completely unexpected, and couldn't have heard it from a better person than Juliet. So
yeah. Oh. Erin, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was just quickly saying to like add that like the community of writers that has opened up since like publishing and being has been like mystery, thriller, and horror has just been like incredibly warm and welcoming and just so great, and like the most exciting, and like I don't know why I didn't. I was like, I don't know. It's like I'm like, it's what you said earlier. It's like we're all kind of like insulated and like right and like doing our thing. You have your head down, doing your work so much. It's easy to forget that there are other folks doing this who are like here to be just awesome. And then something specifically that happened, I was at a conference and I met someone who had taken a class with her over like the early stages of the pandemic. I took a short story class with her, and she was like, two of my students said that you are their favorite writer. And I just like sobbed. Like I just started crying. And she's just like, yeah, like they read your book and they really liked it. And I'm like, oh my God, Michael, please tell them thank you so much. So yeah, that was a pretty awesome moment that I didn't think I would be hearing like anytime soon. So
Yeah. Wow. When I started writing, my first book was published way on the first anniversary of 9/11, so September 11th, 2002. And way back then, you know, it wasn't mystery thriller, you know, suspense or anything like that, although there were elements of it. But back then in, you know, 2002, there was this huge, you had to be the great American novelist, and you had to be on Granta under 30 and literary fiction and, you know, that kind of thing. And it took me a moment. It took me living and figuring out what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it, getting closer and closer to my voice and closer to crime. And it's like, I am home now. Why did you all choose this genre? There's so many others. I mean, Grace, you yourself, you have the other side of the brain. You have a science brain. Why not sci-fi? You know, you're also very smart. Why crime? Why this genre? Eli?
Well, I'm kind of like you, Rachel. I kind of bumbled my way into it because I wasn't, you know, I was reading really a lot of everything with no real emphasis, you know, as an English lit major guy. And when I started trying to write, you know, I was kind of trying to write what I read through Southern literature, Larry Brown's a Mississippi novelist, Harry Crews, Flannery O'Connor, Jesmond Ward. Jesmond Ward was a huge influence that I don't mention enough on Don't Know Tough, Salvage the Bones. But so I wasn't thinking at all in terms of crime, and I couldn't get an agent, you know, so I had like 200 rejections on Don't Know Tough. And then lo and behold, Soho has this wonderful contest thanks to the man, the myth, the legend, Peter Lovesey. And it just happens to be a contest that you don't have to have an agent for. And it's for a debut crime novel. And so the fact that it was a crime novel contest, and it had an element of crime, I mean, there was, you know, a mystery kind of involved.
Oh, yeah.
But that is what really, but we've talked a little bit, you and I, about Elmore Leonard. And so I was into Elmore, man. I was deep in Dutch. But I wasn't just like an avid crime reader all, you know, through and through. But it has been so, it's kind of like, you know, on the bowling lane when they put the bumpers down, like, it's like once I've locked into the genre, it is like the bumpers are there and I can just play and bounce and go. And I've just really loved, you know, having that.
Yeah. Yeah. Crime is forgiving. It's a wonderful place.
So some people might argue that it's not all crime. And that was a lot of the reason why I couldn't publish the book, because people kept making me try to make it into 2 or 3 books. And they didn't know if it was horror, if it was crime fiction, if it was a procedural, if it was paranormal, or if it was a coming of age story.
Yes.
And it was like, why can't it be all of it?
Right.
And there's no reason why it can't be all of it, you know, but, you know, it took Juliet.
Like boxes. Yeah.
Yeah. And it took just one person to see that it could be done. And so, but I have always just enjoyed the genre just outside of the writing. I watched nothing but true crime, and I've done that since I was young, and movies have been a big part of my life, and mostly what I watch is like, you know, crime stuff and old noir films. I grew up on that kind of stuff, and I've always been interested in it. So it was just natural for me that there was a crime involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up reading, I think, the first genre that I ever fell in love with, was mystery, mystery horror, it was like R.L. Stine and Christopher Pike and Lois Duncan and all of those that I just ate up, as a kid. And then, I sort of started reading more widely and reading more literary and, getting my MFA, it very much was, more about like literary, but I found that two things. One, I kind of honed in on, I think, more of my voice as a writer, and in particular on, writing Texas, writing South Texas as a sense of place for my work. And then also I found that, even in even in my short stories, however literary I try to make them, there always seemed to be a crime that happened. And so, with this book, I think it's also a bit of a genre blend. I think that I think it's literary, I think it's suspense, I think it's a family drama, and, of course, it revolves around true crime as well. But I think for me, crime is a place to explore our fears, right? In sort of this amplified way that also feels safe. But it's also, it's a lens through which you can look at any number of societal issues, any number of personal issues. And I think for me, it's a place where I go to look at sort of the best and worst parts of ourselves. And that is really compelling to me as a writer. So I find that, even if I try not to write about crime, there always ends up being a crime. And so, but I do like, and I'm always drawn to, books like Ramona is saying, and I think like everybody here that, I think the genre is blurring a little bit. And I love that, I love it when a book is doing some really unexpected things, with crime and around it.
I can add really quickly. So I also grew up, I have to credit my mother with my love of mysteries, crime, thriller, all of that, because I remember her and I watching Law and Order just constantly as a child. Any procedural, my mother and I are there. Any true crime, we're there. And just so I always had that kind of constant buzz of the story going in my head. So when I started to write my own stuff, I'm kind of of course it starts to fall into this pattern that I know really well. And I think, I know that I gravitate to mysteries because a mystery, like crime especially, it takes apart the way that you see the world. Usually a crime novel is about somebody's world falling apart, and then how in the world do they put it back together?
Right.
And with the repeating of patterns at the end, it's either how do we see the pattern break, or how does it tragically and inevitably, continue? When something kind of goes quote unquote back to normal, it ends tragically. We're oh, we didn't want that. We want something different. And I agree. I am also here for all the blending of genres. I love that everything is just kind of existing in this big in-between state. It makes me really excited as someone who has always loved to do that. And it's also similarly had people be well, could you push it this way or this way? And I'm but could it just maybe be right here?
Grace?
Yeah, I think agreeing with everyone, I love when books act as more than one thing, because the world is complex and, books should reflect that. I think for me, I always read very widely. And then I remember when I sat down to write Portrait, and I thought, this is a heist. And I thought, oh my God, there's no way I'm smart enough to do this, because it's so structured. And I think that crime, and particularly heists and capers, they follow a structure. And that was very challenging for me as someone who had never outlined before. But I also found it really incredible because within this structure, there are endless ways to be surprising. The reader goes in and they have a certain set of expectations, and then there are ways to, both meet those expectations and to do new things within them. And so I think that in particular makes crime and all genre fiction really, really rich for opportunities to do, new exciting things.
Yeah, I agree. Before I forget, if you have any questions out there in Zoom land, please put them in the chat box. We will get to them. If not, I got plenty of things to ask.
Rachel,
Lot.
I gotta throw something in though.
Yeah.
So Ramona just mentioned Juliet, and Juliet is our editor at Soho. And so she found Ramona after all these paranormal, all this stuff, and she was the one who saw that. And then after 200 rejections, she was the one and the whole Soho team who dug Don't Know Tough out of, a contest of hundreds of submissions. And so I just wanted to give mad shout out to Soho and Juliet and the whole crew for having, two in the same year, two people from the same group.
Yeah, no, editors will
Juliet.
make or break. Yay, Juliet. Yay, Soho. Yay. Everyone's story is so remarkably different in so many ways, and it really reflects the commitment of some publishers to publishing a wide variety, beyond the typical, drunk detective playing jazz up in, his apartment or whatever. Everyone's story here is different, and that's what writing should be. That's why we all probably started reading different kinds of stories in the first place. I mean, I love Stephen King, and Eli, you've heard me say this. I was a little Black kid growing up in South Central Los Angeles, scared of the same things those kids in Bangor, Maine were, clowns in sewers. Who doesn't relate to that? And you all are like clowns in sewers for kids and readers everywhere. I mean, Katie's dad is reading books, that's incredible. So questions for anybody, if you put them in the thing or whatever. Going back to what we kind of just said about the blurring of the genre and kind of reading here and there and reading there, crime and horror, well, all of it, it's learning tricks. I love tricks, how to turn the story, red herrings, plots, surprises, all that. Who do you all read, to get inspiration for that? For instance, I'm like Dennis Lehane. I love his stuff. Shutter Island, to me, I worship at the altar of that book. And I'm learning one day, I'm going to write something like that one day. Do you have anything like that?
Yes, Perma Red by Deborah Magpie Irwin. That was my book for me, and of course, all Stephen King too. I love those. But
what was it about it?
For her, she gave voice to Native women in the story, and it was something that I just hadn't seen before, and to that skill level. And when she came and spoke to us at school, she talked about how long it took her, like freaking 10, 15 years to get that book done. I mean, she had to persevere and do all this stuff to get it published. And it is just the most incredible book. It's so true, and it's just brutal. It's brutal. Yeah. And I think it really gave me like the confidence to be brutal in my story too, because I was afraid I was being too brutal, or I was being too honest.
Yeah.
When I read the book, I was like, it's okay to do that. And
that's important.
In a way that people can empathize with and understand. So we haven't read one of the best.
Yeah, no, that permission to do that thing, especially when you're first starting out and you have a community or parents or whatever back there in your, in your Greek chorus area, and just being okay with, okay, well, she did it, so maybe I can do it. Anybody else?
Yeah, that book for me was Chemistry by Weiko Wang, which is not a crime book, but was the first book I'd ever read by an Asian American author who, she was writing about a chemistry graduate student and a Chinese American graduate student. And I remember reading that book, and I was in college at the time, and it was the first time I realized, oh, I don't have to write only about white people. Like I can, I can write what I want. And, maybe at some point other people will read it. And so I think similar to Ramona, that book gave me the opportunity to think, I am free to write what I want, not what I think other people want to read or what else is out there.
Yeah. No, license and permission. Oh, that's so freeing. It really is. Anybody else? We do have a question. Anybody? Okay, so the question is from Mark Jacobs. In your iterations of manuscript drafts, did you have to cut or axe some of your darlings? And what kind of angst did you go through internally before you finally decided to make the cut? To cut or not to cut?
On that because yeah, my first draft of More Than You'll Ever Know was over 600 pages, and
How many?
600.
That's like fantasy level.
Oh, I know, it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And I was like, okay, well, first off, I can't send this to my agent, right? I am not going to do that to this poor woman. So I have to go, I had to sort of do that first massive cut on my own. And I think I tend to write long with everything, even when I write short nonfiction for magazines. I always go long first and then cut it down so that I'm not too precious about cutting my own work, especially when it's that extreme. But then, really throughout the course of the process, it stayed around 450 pages throughout. At least there were probably 20 to 25 iterations of the book. At least 12 to 15 with my agent, and then more with my editors. And the structure changed a lot. The point of view changed. The tense changed. And so throughout all of that, there were huge sections that had to go on the chopping block at different times, or at least go on there to get revised and, figured out how to sort of braid them back in. And it is, it is hard to cut. I think, especially as we got closer to the end, and I was worried about the length of the book, and I was asking first my agent before we went on submission, and then my editor, like, how much are we going to have to cut? I know this is long. And, the figure was always somewhere around, let's try to cut 10,000 words. Let's try to cut 20,000 words. And that's a lot. And so especially as it got, closer to that end point where I did feel really strongly about, almost everything that was in there, it became a challenge to try to, make it more concise. And it didn't become a slim volume by any means. It's still pretty hefty. But I think that, learning how to make those cuts has been really important to me as a writer. Learning how to self-edit, without being defensive, and figure out, what is extra, what did I write so that I could learn the characters, versus what actually needs to be in the book for the reader. Those have been really important lessons for me.
Anyone else? Well,
the biggest and the most difficult, I guess, it wasn't really a cut, but like a redistribution. I had to completely change the structure of my manuscript, and I really was resistant to that at first. I originally has two narrators, and originally they were split pretty evenly. And after plenty of emails between my editor and I was like, okay, I now see the argument for why this needs to be heavily one character over this other character. But that took, quite frankly, just me trying to do the edit I wanted to do while retaining the structure, and then realizing I got to like a point, I think I was about a month into edits, and I was like, darn it, my editor's right. She's right. I'm going to change all of it. And I just took a deep breath, and I'm like, all right, let's just get in there.
Yeah. We have another question. Are there conferences or organizations that helped you with your writing?
My whole really thing started in 2010. That was my last football season. I was just there for like a fall. And then in that spring, I had graduated, and I went to this deal called the Yoknapatawpha Writers Conference in Oxford. And I was writing, but like that's where I met Ace Atkins, and he's like the only other writer for a hot minute that I knew who had like played college football. And so, that was 2010. The book didn't come out till 2022, but it was really the start, where I was around other writers.
I went to I got a scholarship to writing by writers,
Hmm.
and puts that together. And that particular workshop was in Washington, and it was like, oh my God, it was like a 3-hour drive from Seattle, like up into the mountains, like way up on this huge peak. And it was insanity. I was kind of freaked out when I got there. I was like, oh my God, I got lost. I had to call my husband to get me there. And it was like, but once I got up there, and this was like right after I got my MFA and I had my first draft, I went there with the first draft, and I was able to completely do a second draft while I was there, because the best part about that, well, for the purpose of being, doing a lot of work, there was no TVs in that place anywhere. You couldn't. There was not a TV, and I had a roommate who turned the air conditioner on so cold every night I couldn't sleep. Anyway, so I got a lot of writing done. I'll just put, and then second draft came out of just like 6 days of grinding and sitting there and having nothing else to do but write and look at the mountains. Yeah. That's all I did, and it was great.
Wow.
It was an awesome time, and I'm most grateful for it.
Well, before my last question, I want to say to everyone out there, join us tomorrow, Thursday, April 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time for a conversation with the nominees for the Simon & Schuster Mary Higgins Clark Award. You can learn more about the Edgar Awards by following us on social media using the hashtag Edgars2023 hashtag, or by visiting the website mysterywriters.org and edgarawards.com. So my last question to my lovely panelists, what's next for you in our, 4 minutes? What's next?
Book number 2. I've got the sequel going, and I'm about 130 pages into it right now. So that's what's going on right now. And my husband and I have 4 documentaries in various stages of production right now. And yeah, so there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, but what else are you gonna do? Not right?
That's right. That's right.
Well, sleep.
I'm also working on the next book. I have about 100 pages of book 2, which is also set in South Texas. And it's about 3 women who are connected over 20 years by a teenager's forced birth and the kidnapping that follows. So it's far enough along to feel like it's becoming a book, but still pretty early.
Sounds good.
Yeah, same for me. Working on book 2, I have a very rough draft of it, so it feels like it's becoming a book, but not quite there yet. And it's set at Stanford Med, so writing what I know and sometimes love. And it's about 2 Stanford graduate students and longtime academic rivals who find themselves on opposite ends of an FBI investigation when one gets accused of spying for the Chinese government and the other gets recruited as an FBI informant to catch her. So also inspired by a true story. I'm excited about what it'll become, but it's still in the works.
Awesome.
I'm also on, there's a theme here. I'm also on book 2. It is drafted though. So I'm in the middle of developmental edits. It's called One of You. It's about 2 Haitian American sisters. In the wake of their mother's death, this long lost family friend shows up and just starts wreaking havoc. And they have to work together to figure out who this woman is and what in the world she actually wants.
Wow, that sounds good. And Mr. Cranor.
Yes, ma'am. My second book came out April 4th. It's called Ozark Dogs, and it's been awesome. It's been great, and I timed it up just right so that I'm doing my edits on the 3rd book all while this book's coming out. So that's been the most fun doing all that while I've been trying to get this one out. So it's been great.
Wow. Well, I look forward to reading number 2 and number 3, and marveling at your tricks. And thank you, everyone out there in Zoom land and Mystery Land. We really appreciate you being a part of tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow.